Good evening and welcome to the Healthy Heart Nation's heart-to-heart conversation where we will be discussing the cruel, among other things, the cruel optimism of a fair and just society. I am Danette Batiste, and I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager, as well as a CEO of a nonprofit called Healthy Heart Nation, where we bring together the best thought leaders from health, education, justice, and business to talk about the things that are affecting the society today, to determine ways that we can eliminate the disparities, specifically in the Black community. Cruel Optimism of a Fair and Just Society by Nassar Mir shares some information about what we can learn from successes and failures in pursuit of racial justice. He feels that a dominant view of racial justice has long been linked to a cruel optimism, which normalizes social and political outcomes that sustain racial injustice, despite successive government wieldings that means to address it. Looking at numerous examples across anti-racist movements and key developments in nationhood, nationalism, institutional racism, migration, white supremacy, and the disparities of COVID-19, Nassar Mir, in his book, argues for the need to move on from the perpetual crisis in racial justice to a turning point that might herald a change to deep-seated systems of racism. Today's discussion will bring some key people and from the Healthy Heart Nation group just to discuss this from a layman's term, from a standpoint of just the everyday people and how these situations have affected us on a day-to-day basis. And so one of our guests today is Bill Clay. Bill is a retired AT&T executive and has worked for AT&T will work for AT&T for 30 years. Prior to his employment with AT&T, he served with the U.S. Air Force as an air traffic controller. He also worked for Mammoth and Prudential life insurance companies as a salesman and a sales manager. Bill likes to point out that his working career began when he was 12 years old, and he purchased his paper route of 75 customers and sold it 4 years later after growing his route to 300 customers. So he was born a salesman, and sales just runs through his blood. Bill has been active in promoting equality for Black people starting as early as 1964 when he was serving in the Air Force in Japan, where he led a demonstration of protesters for segregated bars and clubs that would not serve Black airmen. He continued his activists in civilian life, by serving on the Southern California Committee of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Los Angeles Urban League Board, and vice chair for 7 years. He's also a founder of the National Black Business Council. Bill served for 5 years as president of CITIES, a Black ERG started in '69 for employees of Pacific Bell. Bill was also a founding member of the network, which was a meager of various Black employee groups in AT&T. And so he has just done a lot. We could read his bio for the duration of this program. So Bill, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so we also are joined by Dr. Columbus Batiste, a board certified interventional cardiologist And he also serves as an assistant clinical professor at the University of California, Riverside School of Medicine. And so in 2010, Dr. Petit sought to break the cycle of generational chronic disease and began promoting a long-term solution for his patients through nutrition, stress reduction, and exercise. And as a result, Dr. Petit has led out in establishing the integrative cardio disease program to prevent reoccurrence of major adverse cardiac events. Dr. Batisse's mission is to share information so that each one can teach one about the benefits of plant-based nutrition, daily exercise, stress reduction, and therefore provide everyone with the opportunity to take control of their health. So welcome to the show today, you all. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Bill, it's good to see you. How are you
Nice
doing?
Nice to see you, Columbus. I'm doing well, thank you.
Yes, man, I'll tell you, it was good catching up with you here recently. It had been probably about 20 years, I think, since I've seen you, and
Yes.
I don't think you've aged one bit, just as spry and vigorous as ever.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. So when Danette presented the opportunity to have a discussion with you about this, and with all of your wealth of knowledge, I jumped at the opportunity just to kind of sit at the table with you and have a discussion. So I'm excited, man. I'm excited to kind of talk about this. We live in challenging times, and I think one thing I know that you're aware of, and you're such a well-read individual, is that our mindset plays such a huge role. And I see these situations more as opportunities than I do see them as challenges, opportunities for us to rise to the occasion and provide solutions and really dig into the crux of what's going on. And so I see this as an opportunity, and for many, those who may be tuning in, this is one of the first steps for an opportunity for them to look at this recent decision by SCOTUS from perhaps a different perspective and where we go from here. So, all right.
Well, I agree too. It's an opportunity, like a lot of people, but myself at my age, I'm looking at. I was very disappointed, but not surprised, because as a student of history, this has happened from the time that this country was formed as it relates to Black people of color. It was founded on the basis of so-called we hold these truths to be self-evident and all men are created equal. But when Thomas Jefferson was writing that, it wasn't including us, and he only included us as 3/5 of a person. So even and so I've seen this as a student of history. I've seen this situation happen in which we start making progress, certainly, after the Civil War and emancipation of slaves. We were supposed to be, there was the Freedmen's Bureau, and the blacks were good, and the first black senator, Hiram Rhodes Revell, was elected in Mississippi, and we were making progress, but we didn't get our 40 acres and a mule, which was also promised to us. Okay, but Andrew Johnson came in after Lincoln. And so what happened? He removed the federal soldiers from the South, and immediately the black codes and ultimately Jim Crow laws entered into effect. And we saw that again in the late 50s when James Meredith was trying to enter University of Mississippi. They had to have federal troops down there. So once they put him in just to get him in the class, then after they left, they just put in policies. They started looking at, okay, how can we still restrict us from getting in there, and coming up with new obstacles to people. And at the same time, painting the image that people who were, even though they were affirmative action was supposed to give people who had been underprivileged an opportunity, open the door for them. But they made it seem like we were taking positions from them. But the reality
let's stay there for a second. What because you were living, breathing, working, participating, you understood all that. What's your recollection of what affirmative action meant at the time that it came out?
Well, to me, the only thing I saw, because at the time the affirmative action was being implemented, I was right after when I started working for Pacific Bell. Okay, then corporations started looking at that. The only thing I saw is when I went in the initial training class, a whole bunch of white women. that previously weren't given that opportunity. I understand
Mm-hmm.
they took advantage of it, which I'm not despairing that, but I want to make it
Mm-hmm.
clear, that the biggest beneficiaries of the affirmative action was that. And then there was the issue of some people would say, well, I didn't get my spot because you had 100% of spot. Now you just get 99 of them. So I
Mm-hmm.
got cheated,
Yeah.
And so my personal thing, I just felt that I always came up in the thing, I had to work harder and smarter than anybody else.
Yeah.
And I understand that nobody was going to give me anything. See, the first
Mm-hmm.
thing, you got to go in with a mindset. That's the
Mm-hmm.
only reason anybody's going to hire you. You can make them some money or save them some money.
Right.
And you have to start demonstrating that you're doing either one of the two. Otherwise, any smart business person gonna get rid of you anyway.
Right. That's just what they do. Well, for
Right.
me, like, just even in hearing
Mhm.
the decision about affirmative action, when I first heard it, of course you immediately get discouraged. So unlike you, Bill, I was surprised because I was, I guess, ignorant of the fact that, once you had the initial Supreme Court decision, that it could not be reversed. That each person, as they were sitting in and they were going through their confirmation hearings, they all stated that they would not be turning back decisions that have been and have set precedents. And so when this happened, I immediately was very discouraged, very upset about what that meant, specifically to the two universities and schools that the decision spoke to. But from a corporate standpoint, as a DE&I manager, we all know that in a lot of instances, it's about that domino. And
Right.
once that one domino falls, others fall too. So, I'm looking 5, 6 steps ahead to see how is this going to affect the work that I am attempting to do and what others are attempting to do in a corporate space to push the agenda forward, that inclusion is important, that we need to continue to work to ensure that we have representation of all people in the workplace. And so my concern was very direct about how does this affect progress that has been made, and and is there going to be a strong need for us all to singularly focus on pushing forward from here?
Well, there's no question. See, the reason I wasn't completely surprised is because I'm a student of history.
Mm-hmm.
The Dred Scott decision in 1857, and Dred tried to sit on, he actually got to Missouri, which was a free state, as a slave, and said, oh, I'm free now. But then the Dred Scott decision said, even though you're in a free state, you could be in Detroit, you could be in New York, you still are not a citizen.
Right.
That's what the Dred Scott decision. Then following that came the Plessy versus Ferguson decision in 1896,
Right.
which said separate but equal. When Homer Plessy tried to sit on he was 1/8 black, and he tried to sit on a rail car, and so he filed suit. So what happened after each one of those decisions is even though I tell people the Civil War was over, but the fight wasn't over.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Because guess what? As soon as they retooled, then they start saying, how do we attack the system to continue to benefit us?
Yeah.
And that gets to something that's endemic to this society, and that's white body supremacy. And I'm not talking about white supremacy or Nazi. I'm talking about the idea that a person is superior because they have white skin. And that has been perpetuated through our media and everything else.
Yeah.
And we all have been impacted by it.
For sure, for sure. And and I want to bring a slightly different angle and perspective to this. And so, one of the things that I found is, in this slide I have up where it says that affirmative action refers to the practices aimed at alleviating racial and gender-based discrimination. So we understand that. But what I felt was so interesting out of the decision was that Justice Clarence Thomas, he basically stated that I hold our enduring hope that this country will live up to its principles that all men are created equal, are equal citizens, and must be treated equally before the law. Now, what's so interesting about that is that many will come and they will say, well, you know what, Bill Clay, all that stuff you're saying is ancient history. Is what they're saying. That's ancient history. That's not what's happening in today's day and age. And so I started viewing this from the perspective and the purview of a medical scientist, of a researcher, where we look at a hypothesis and we call it a null hypothesis. And for those that are less familiar with this, basically it says that, you know what, there's no difference between these two drugs. There's no difference between these two populations. Everything is the same. Now, the alternative hypothesis is, yeah, there is a difference between these two, that something is distinctly different in the way in which they're treated. So the null hypothesis in the relationship to this of affirmative action says, I see no difference in how African Americans are treated, how women are treated, how people of different sexual orientations are treated, is what the null hypothesis is. Therefore, there is no need for affirmative action, is what that almost states. And they say that any discriminatory processes that may happen are just solely due to chance. It's luck. This is not the norm. It doesn't require systematic change because this is not what will happen. But what's so interesting, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm going to say if I want to destroy that, one of the things that, or counter that, you go ask the white person, would they like to be black? And the answer, most of them are not. And I just saw a video that came on, I believe it was Instagram, and it showed this one person in the video was a white guy with a cane. He was supposed to be blind, tall, blonde, good-looking guy, walking down the street, and as he walked by people, he grabbed their arm. They looked over at him and saw he was white, and some of them just grabbed his hand or arm and carried on. Then they had another black guy, a little shorter, 5'8" or 5'9", doing the same thing. He walked down, he grabbed their arm, and some people, every person shook him away, and some people just started wiping their arm. See, that's because it's been ingrained in society that they have a superior and that we're inferior. So in order to see, you can pass a law and everything, but you can't change what's in somebody's heart. And you just look at what's happening now in our society. We got a man running for president who's been convicted of rape and all other kind of things, and charges pending against him, and he's a leading candidate and a high probability could win again. Think about this. Compare that to when Obama was in for 8 years, which many of us thought, wow, we have reached the pinnacle, man. We finally got a man who's the president of the United States. They spent 8 years trying to destroy him and looking at everything, even attacking him when he was wearing a tan suit till somebody brought up video and showed that Reagan had one on.
Right. Just the differences, the alternate, the differences are.
The differences is that one was black and one was white. And so therefore they didn't want to accept the fact that somebody could be, number one, smart, and articulate, because that didn't conform to their view. Now, that's even to the people who I consider, and I use this term lightly, what I call the good white people, the people who be very paternalistic to you. I'm going to take care of you. They basically are saying, oh, you can't help yourself, or I'm going to help you. And so not saying you have capabilities, you can do things, that kind of thing, but I'm going to give you something. So once you start saying giving, so people think that someone is looking to give us things. We have never asked for anybody to give anything. We've worked for every damn thing that we got in this life, in this country. We worked for free for years, and now, we came back and work under onerous conditions and circumstances and still prospered. Okay, still we rise, Yes. And so the issue is, how do you, I feel in order for this to change, those people who have the heart and the right, that are white, by the way, black people can't change this because we aren't the problem. It's white people. They need to stand up. You see some of these people, I was looking at the news today, and, a person was talking about how awful Trump was. He was the most awful person. But if we get down and vote, we're going to vote for him. Well, ain't that a bummer? See, that's, see, so the issue is, how do we change the hearts and how do we get people to counter? Because right now, it's a minority that's controlling things in this country. And that stems, the reason I go into historical context is if you don't understand history, you don't understand what's happening today. First, the elections, the reason that the politicians who may disagree with people or other people is because of the Electoral College, which was a relic to satisfy the southern states, to give them power. Can look at the situation. There's 100 people in the Senate, 2 for every state. Between Wyoming, North Dakota, and South Dakota, there's twice as many people in LA, and they got 6 senators. That's power.
Yes.
And as long as you have that in people that don't have the sensitivity to it, and they further exacerbate it because of redlining, keeping us segregated. Even though I grew up in the North, grew up in Detroit, it eventually, even though we didn't have white and colored signs, but there was places we didn't go.
You just knew that. You just knew that. Right.
You just knew that there was places you didn't go.
Right.
But even though it was, if we crossed
the
Mason-Dixon line,
it was
crossed the
unspoken.
Mason-Dixon line, then they had clear signs, because those people. So I'm not trying to change their minds. I'm trying to get to, if I want to do anything for us, what can we do? Number one, let's pay attention to, we got to vote. We got to pay attention. We got to vote for the dog catcher. See, this is what the opposition has done. They fell back and said, look, how do we attack this? We can't attack it from the top, so I'm going to attack it from here. I'm attacking it at school boards. You saw what it had at the Chino school board just today. They told the state superintendent they had him escorted out because they're arguing and they're banning books because they don't want the history to be known.
Right.
Because you hear things, I heard Governor DeSantis say, why should our kids feel bad about slavery? We didn't have any slaves. But you benefited by it. It's history.
Right.
Okay.
And so
see, as long as that attitude permeates yourself, the reason I said you had to take it on a holistic approach, if you don't consider all of these things, we're missing it.
Yeah.
We're missing it. I feel, as you can tell, I feel very passionate about this. And I've always felt this way.
No, right. And so, Columbus, when you were talking about the alternate hypothesis, did you?
Well, that's just another approach towards looking at from a scientific perspective, which says that there is a difference, and when you apply that to the concept of affirmative action, whereas the hypothesis put forth by SCOTUS was that there is no difference, therefore there is no need for affirmative action because it's more of an injustice than it is a justice. So an alternative hypothesis is there is a difference. That this is not just historical. This is not something that is a relic solely of the enslavement. This is something that exists in the modern day society. And when you say that, then it says, well, perhaps we do need that people are mistreated based on their gender and their race and their sexuality, and that we do have to now go ahead and say, well, let's gather the data and let's see what the evidence looks like. Let's see if the evidence supports that we live in a free and fair and just society, or do we live in one in which it's biased to this day and age? Is this a modern day issue? Is there no issue or concerns with equity or equality, or is this something that has always persisted? And so, I think one of the things, and Bill, you've already kind of mentioned this directly, indirectly, is what's the reality? What's the reality? What's the reality of the existence right now compared to what does justice look like? And reflect on this slide for a second. What does this mean to you? What does this mean in your life's journey?
Well, the reality is what's really happening. What we would like is equity, to be equal, and equity means that, okay, fine, the person that's the shorter in this third graphic here on the graphic has to have a little lift so that they can see over that fence. Okay, someone else who's a little bit taller only needs one box, and then the taller person only needs one. Well, essentially, what I look at is that first, that justice hasn't been equal. Because of the equal, you see the unequalness, and I see us as that person on the end. We can't reach. We're not going to see justice because we can't see the field.
Right.
You know?
Right. Right.
You know, we don't understand. So I hate to go back to the thing. We have to understand our history.
Mm-hmm.
We have to understand history, period, because it repeats itself, as I just kind of went through earlier. We're seeing the same things. We make a couple steps, and guess what? They sit down and they figure out, okay, how do we counter that? Because power only yields to superior power.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to willingly say, let's be equal. That's not how it works. This country, this world isn't built that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this country definitely. You know, I was taking a look at some of money drives a lot of things here in the country, money. And I started looking at the richest people. Everybody looks at Oprah and say, Oprah, oh yeah, she's dominant, you know, she's rich, which she is, worth $3 billion. But you know where she sits on them $4 billion list? She's number 1,284.
Right.
Okay, you know, in the grand scheme of things. But what brings her up, that gives her a little equity, I'm gonna use her versus Robert Smith, who's worth more. He's the richest Black person. He's worth $8 billion.
Mm-hmm.
What gives Oprah a little equity is she has a vehicle to communicate and get to people, to give that equity. She has a network.
It's the bullhorn, right?
The
and
bullhorn.
So when I look at
that.
this,
Robert has twice as much money,
right,
but may not have as much influence.
Yes. And when I look at this picture, you know, I look at, you know, intentionality more than anything. Like it's an intentionality from an equity standpoint, and it's not necessarily about evenly distributing, you know, tool, right? I'm looking at the box as the tool. It's not about evenly distributing the tool.
Right.
It's about looking at each individual person and determining what they need. And so if you're looking at what each person needs, it's different based on the person. And so the way that, you know, even from a DE&I standpoint, when we're looking at addressing, you know, these things in the workplace from a corporate standpoint, you know, you have to look at the fact that each situation is not going to be the same. It's going to require a different approach. It's going to require different tools. It's going to require like really getting to know the individual and determining what it is that they need so that you can provide it to them so that you can make their situation better. And so, you know, that's kind of what I'm seeing from this this is illustration, Columbus.
But see, in the corporate world, you got to have people that are willing to work with people and give them that opportunity to do that, to mentor them, to help them, because everybody doesn't come out the womb or to walk into the corporate door well prepared. Correct. Somebody has got their back.
Yes.
Yeah. And you mentioned opportunities, and I think one of the areas when we start to kind of really parse through, what does the evidence tell us? Does the evidence prove what was supposed by a Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, or does it prove the alternative hypothesis that there is a difference and people are treated differently? So we look at employment opportunities. So you come from the business sector. I'm sure you've hired and you fired.
Right.
And so
you both have.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, this is true. So you both understand as it relates to what goes into the decisions to hire someone. And when you seek applicants who are very similar, when they have qualifications across the board. And so speak to that a little bit. Speak to just the process of going about it from the lens of yourself, but also what your impression is of the lens of your colleagues who may not be of the same ethnicity as you.
Well, you're speaking of men of prison records, and that just sparked something, because when I was first level supervisor, I was sent a person, and they told me from HR, this person had been in Folsom. He had been done some hard time. And the company was calling themselves trying to do something, and they asked me to put him. Nobody else knew about this. This was supposed to be,
Okay.
Well,
so his status was not known to everyone.
Right, precisely.
Okay.
And it's kind of interesting. They assigned him to me
Okay.
to work for me. Saying we're gonna do this trial and put this guy in here. He's, he spent something like 20 years. He was in for murder or something, but he had really rehabilitated and everything else.
Sure.
Well, to make a long story short, this guy was one of the hardest working and the best employee I had, I mean, because I gave him the opportunity and I said, I believe in you, brother.
Absolutely.
And he performed. Now,
yes.
Now, I know there were some peers of mine. If they had this guy, they'd have been looking for everything, every little thing, because once they had that knowledge, that he was in prison, just like once I walk into the door, regardless of what my background, I walk in a corporate office, they look at my skin. Whatever you think of Black people, then that's what they associate before I open my mouth.
Sure.
Okay? And so what I proved is that given an opportunity.
Exactly.
And this guy excelled. I mean, he blew away. He was older to begin with. This was an entry-level job, but he appreciated it.
Absolutely.
And he appreciated the opportunity, and he ran with it. But I know for a fact, because I saw it happen. If that had been another one of my peers, they would have, did you turn left and you should have turned right? Let me write that up.
So they're looking for any excuse, right? To prove why they shouldn't be there.
Let me
versus
jump in.
Trying to give them a fair opportunity for them to be there.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So Bill, I have a question, and Danette, I have a question. I want both parts. We'll start with Danette with this one here first, then go you, Bill. So when we look at this, have you ever hired someone based upon a prior relationship that maybe they're friends with you or friends with someone that you know, or that they have a similar pathway as you? Perhaps they've attended your alma mater, they've been a part of your fraternity or sorority or your church, or they've been recommended. Has that ever happened inside your career of hiring individuals?
Yeah. So the answer to that is, of course, I've hired and fired people as well. And, in each of those instances, what everybody wants is the opportunity. Now we've learned, now these things kind of have names. There's affinity bias, there's halo bias, there's all kinds of different bias that each person, while you're hiring, you have them. We also just essentially talk about just the number of stereotypes that each of us has in our minds, period. Like we're inundated with over 1 million, and the brain's goal is to not work hard. Right. So that's where the whole stereotype comes through. It's like, okay, we're going to categorize these certain things so we don't have to think about it. We're going to make these assumptions. And so, as you're doing these biases, they come up all the time. So yes, if someone goes to the same school, you're assuming that they've had the same experiences as you, and you view yourself highly. So therefore, these people get viewed highly. Does it always convert? No. If someone went to a rival school, school you didn't like, will they be given the opportunity? You never know. And so what I kind of advocate for in the role of DE&I is that each person bring their biases to the table, not act like they don't exist, but bring them to the table. And then in the same token, try to even out the playing field by letting you not be the only person who has that decision making. Like, you're not the only one. Bring different people in to bring different perspectives for each candidate, because regardless of who the candidate is, that person's going to get an opportunity that they're either going to take and do well with, or they're not going to make it. And that's across the board. There's no formula that works all the time when you're hiring. So you're taking a chance, you're taking an opportunity. But the thing is like, are you taking a chance on something that you know? Or are you taking a chance on something that you don't? And the challenge is that the most people in authority want to take the chance on something something that they know, and in most instances, that's someone who looks like them.
Right. And you can't be in business without taking risks. What you want
Right.
to do is minimize the level of risk. So
Mhm.
have I hired the people that I know? Absolutely. And
Mhm.
you know, I've actually sought people out, you know, for that. But the one thing I made clear to them, just because you know me, I'm your
You don't
boss,
know me.
you got to perform. You
Right.
know, I mean, I learned that, you know, that came clear to me when I went in the military.
Mhm.
I went in basic training, and it just so happens I joined with a friend of mine. I went to high school. We were good friends. We were buddies all through school. We joined, and we're gonna be buddies going through school. I had had 2 years of ROTC, so you know
Mhm.
I was well briefed militarily. So, and then there was several other guys unbeknownst to us who also went to the school. One guy played
Okay.
on the football team, and so we all, and you know, when we showed up at, you know, on the train heading to San Antonio, hey man, we gonna have a ball down here, boy. You know, it's just a club here. You know, make a long story short, we get there
Mhm.
because of my prior ROTC training. I was made
Mhm.
the assistant, the dorm chief, the assistant
Okay.
DI,
Mhm.
which had a group of 70 guys in there, you know, these white guys and everything. My friends thought, oh, well, we got it going now, you know,
They have an
Bill's the
end.
man,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and that came to head on our first time we got to leave.
Mhm.
And it was a day leave. We could go down to San Antonio, and we all, you know, and as a group, we went down there and kind of, you know, looked around, saw, you know, the special sites into Alamo and stuff like that. And then, you
Mhm.
know, we had to come back. We had a curfew. You had to be back at a certain time in the barracks. If you were
Mhm.
not back, then you had to be put on on duty.
Sure.
Well, so we're walking back, and all of a sudden I look at my watch. This man, we're getting close. So we start running,
Mhm.
and so running to get back. And all of a sudden, the guy stopped. They said, "Wait, hold it, Bill. You the man. You in charge. You the one gonna be checking people while we running." I said, "No, I can't do that because you 7 guys. When I get there, there's another 63, and most of them from Alabama, and so they just waiting on me to show some preferences, so
Yes.
they can help."
Right.
So I ran ahead, and sat there at the door. Few
Got there
minutes
just
before
in
them,
time, huh?
they walked in. I put every one of them on crew, and from then on, I was persona non grata between the guys. Oh man, this brother, where he to go, man? You know,
Right. You became one of them. You became one of them.
But I
Just
did the same thing for white guys who
yeah,
came
it
up
was
too.
you
See,
have to be fair and equitable.
they
Right.
didn't see that. See that what they
Right.
saw was I was supposed to give them some
How you
special
treated them.
treatment.
Yes.
And you know, it was hard for me to do that when we were together and I ran. They should have
Right. They
ran.
should have known that was the cue.
Right.
So what about for you, Columbus? What about you in terms of your hiring, people you know, and relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I find oftentimes, I mean, my perspective on it is that when I'm looking at hiring, I'm looking through applications, it starts to blur over after a while. You see
Mhm.
all these extremely highly
Competent.
they have this competent, their
Mhm.
skill sets there,
Yeah.
they offer a whole lot, and you're trying to parse through words to figure out how can I tease out who's better, who's not. And it
Mhm.
becomes so
Mhm.
easy to say, well, if someone is a personal recommendation, it's so easy to get that person because you're like,
Mhm.
okay, well, I trust this person. I know who they are. They're good people, a good family, a good education. I'm gonna go there. But the
Mhm.
reality of it is what started to sink in with me is the fact, as it relates specifically to this conversation of affirmative action, is that from a historical and a current state, how many individuals of color or of
Mhm.
different sexual orientations are in positions to hire and can and have a network where they can tap in to give someone an opportunity.
Right.
And so if I'm not, and it's a dominant society where perhaps I haven't had that exposure, I may naturally be inclined to go in and hire people who look like me or based upon
Absolutely.
references from
Mhm.
my friend bases and so forth. And so it may or may not be a malicious intent, but it is
Mhm.
a fact of nature. Is what we see is that there are continual biases,
Right.
and that we see
Mhm.
we can't hide from our skin, and that's
Right.
what
Right.
these studies have shown. Is they've shown continually whether or not you look inside the penal system, or whether or not you look
Mhm.
inside of the issues here, where a study done in MIT, and they took 5,000 resumes for
Mm-hmm.
1,300 jobs. And basically, if you had an ethnic name, a cultural name, you were
Mhm.
less likely to be contacted for job interviews. And
Yes.
this really came to a boil with a lawsuit against a large corporation about this
Right.
the person submitted an application and actually took out some of the job qualifications, some of her experience, but had to
Mm-hmm.
change the name. And they
Mm-hmm.
offered her an interview based upon a more common traditional name than an ethnic name. And so she
Yeah.
won a lawsuit. And
Right.
so we know these practices still exist.
They
Yeah.
still exist, and we all have them, right?
Yes,
So
Right,
the
right, we
biases,
do.
right.
like we're, it's not like,
Mhm.
okay, only white people have biases, or
No.
this is an evil
Mhm.
type situation. We
No.
all have them. What I think we're all kind of talking about is just the fact that if a lot of the people in the position of power don't look like us, it's not going to necessarily benefit us. It's a detractor. And so, it's really about identifying, if you really want to be fair and equitable, you have to bring different types of people to the table from the hiring panels, so that there is more being looked at than just the things that you find are valuable.
And let me give you an example of you mentioned education. I remember an individual who came to me. His resume. I mean, he graduated from Harvard. He had about 2 or 3 masters. He had a master's from USC, had masters over here, had all kind of degrees.
Right.
All kind of qualifications come in there.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at on paper, But when I sat down with the young man, what I found out, he was looking for a job because he didn't have a job. He didn't have a passion. That this wasn't what he really wanted to do. This was going to be a pass through. So therefore, somebody else might have hired him and said, look, we got to get this guy, man. It's like he got a Harvard degree, but he don't come in. He didn't want to do this. He just needed to pay the rent.
Right.
And I understood that. So I
Right.
talked to him. And he's a friend now. I talked to him. I said, brother, you're not ready for this. I said, you need to go pursue what you need to. Why you spend all that time in school? And I said, this is a pass through. You're not starving. You say you got some money. You can figure out a way you can make it, and where you're going to stick it. Come in here, and you're going to come in here, and you're going to be dissatisfied because it's not in your field.
Right. Right.
Okay. And guess what? Once you become dissatisfied, your performance is probably going to reflect that.
It's true. Right.
Okay.
And that has
so
nothing to do with the color. But yes,
and then
absolutely.
it gives a person a legitimate reason
to
say he's not qualified or he can't perform.
He's not
that kind of thing. He was just
He's
in
not
a wrong
right for the job.
Right.
Yeah.
So sometimes that was an exception, but I remember him so clearly, and I see him today. When I run into him occasionally, he's doing his thing in what he really wanted to do.
Yes.
So you have to. We all. I have biases, but and I freely admit, and I used to admit, if there is a qualified Black person and a qualified white person, I'm giving all things. I'm leaning toward Black. Okay.
To give the opportunity, right?
Because that's what I'm supposed to do. Now, that's what I found that was missing when I was working with some of my peers as they moved up in the corporate ladder, and we had the ability to hire.
They were afraid to do so. They were afraid
because
it felt like it was going to negatively impact their standings.
Right. They didn't. They fell into this. Well, I can recall a discussion. Someone said, why aren't you hiring somebody? Well, Bill, I don't want to assume that I'm hiring too many Black people. I said, that's not the issue. The issue is what's your objective? Are you achieving your objective? Can they help you do that? That's what you focus on. I brought some people in that's going to make me successful, making the corporation successful. Remember, I go back to make the company some money or save them some money. So I always go back
and just going back to what you just said, because even in those instances, people think that you're hiring them just because they're Black. You're saying, if I've got equal qualifications and both people can do the job, then and only then are you making that decision. And so often people are like thinking that, Black people or minorities or LGBTQs or women are getting these opportunities that they cannot handle. that they're not capable of, that they
Right.
don't have the qualifications for. And that is, I would just have to say that is generally, if not typically, not the case. These people are overqualified, more than willing, more than able, more than capable. They're just not given the opportunities as often. And so, there is some level of intentionality that has to sometimes come into play when you're making those types of decisions.
And sometimes you got to make the decision. I've seen some people that were just I said, if they had a little mentoring, they're going to be a superstar.
Potential. So now
I
it's
just got it
potential.
right.
Yeah.
I just got to get them in that door, and they're gonna bust it open. And most
Yes,
of the
because
time,
they have
I
the
was
desire.
right.
Right.
I gave them that opportunity. But if I just dealt it on empirical data, looking at front of me in terms of resume and certain things, they might say, "Oh, well, they've been edged out by someone else."
Right.
But you put somebody in a position. See, we need more of that because, understand, we're trying to overcome a deficit.
Yes.
So we got to bring people up. See, when I and see, we're speaking here now on affirmative action. The time that I spent in schools and talking to kids, the reason I do that, because the deficit starts there, even in the society. Do you know when the average kid starts kindergarten, between black and white, the difference between the two is the vocabulary of the white kid is larger than the one of the black kid.
Right.
That's empirical data has been, right now I don't have the study in front of me, studies that has been proven. Okay. So therefore, if you come in, think you're trying to take standardized tests. Standardized tests holds a whole lot of different words. If you don't understand those words and don't have the comprehension, you're not going to do well. Or either you're going to sit there and try to figure out, now, what do they mean by that word? Whereas a person who has been well read and understand words and they come flowing to them, oh, I understand that, yeah, and they can move on. So they do well. That's when they say some people don't do well on standardized tests as well. Other people do, if you give them a chance. But if you use the standardized test, which is essentially what they were using in this case for the affirmative action, because because what Bloom sought out was an Asian person and say, okay, you scored almost perfect on your SATs. You're competing at Harvard and everything. But you know what? He was competing against a small minority. Harvard's legacy is 43% of their legacy.
Admittance, right?
Admittance is legacy people. Right. Then you have the dean's list. See, understand, they're trying to get certain people, and in addition to the athletics list. So when you get down to it, there's 73% of the people admitted have been admitted under special circumstances.
Yes.
Okay. And then we got this small group of people competing for the 27% that's left. So and I was pleased with what happened when I saw Wesleyan University said they were eliminating the legacy admissions.
Right.
Okay. But that's a start. Okay. You need to have more of that. And because this is where they were using, saying, well, we're bringing unqualified people in here. Oh, we're bringing people in and they look at, well, how many graduate in 4 years? Well, then let's look at something else. A measure of success is not, did you graduate in 4 years? I want to look at other things. Like, for example, I started working, you mentioned in my bio, I started as a paper boy at 12 years old.
Okay.
I have never gone to school and not worked.
Yeah.
From the time I was 12. Now, think if I had the time just to say I could do other things, because that took time away for maybe enrichment opportunities or extra studying,
extracurricular or whatever. It was about that check, right? It was about survival.
Right. I might take the C student who worked full time, supported his family and everything else and maintained that over somebody who was A student, didn't have to do nothing but go to keg parties.
Because the campus. C student is functioning in real life situations, right? So yes. Yeah. So Columbus, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's involved with these student enrollments and everything of that sort. I think it's clear that we understand a person's academic achievements are not always a 1-to-1 ratio predictive value of their success in life.
Right.
At the end of the day, these schools want people to matriculate through. They want them to become successful. Then that way they're able to donate back, and that they have a line of mentorship is ultimately that's there. But I think the recognition that you guys already brought forth, that there are inherent and embedded biases, or we call them legacies, that exist in every institution. Historically Black colleges and universities, these predominantly white institutions too as well, that they're pervasive. And so it's about what we're saying is I think the question is that there is enough evidence to support the hypothesis that there has been continual discriminatory practices in the area of business, in the area of education, in the area of housing, in the area of financing, historically and in the current day too as well. And so what does that mean as it relates to affirmative action? Affirmative action means that I am going to legislate that there's an opportunity for these individuals who are legacy children of discriminatory practices, legacy children of those enslaved. And that was not that long ago that my own grandfather wasn't able to do certain things. I wasn't able to be educated, when he was born at that time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, I think it was 1890 something that he was born. And so when we understand that conceptually, that I'm saying just 2 generations prior, that's an issue. This is something my own father worked heavily with Head Start, of trying to start Head Start. You speak to the vocabulary, to that basic fundamental education inside of our community that's there. But we look at funding in communities that are at risk is markedly less to prepare. That we see that there's a lack of funding. We see that all these things translate over, that people are not given an adequate opportunity. And it's really unfair. I mean, my folks, they had to work 2-3 jobs to send us to private school, buses out of the inner city to areas that are there. I'm privileged in a sense because I had a 2-parent home where they were able to do that and afford me the ability to be successful in life. And the question at this point now is, that's the exception. Right. That's by chance. That's not because of the structure of our society. And so if it's not the structure of our society, we have to do something that we can uplift the lowest inside of our society. And that's what I believe that we're all called towards.
And I'm gonna give you the opposite. I didn't have those structural opportunities in advance. I came from, I was raised by a single mother who had a grade school education and was raised and born in the 20s and the 1920 in Mississippi, and that's where the family came up with. And she worked as a domestic. And so, but here's where I got the advantage over some others. Some of the people that she worked for as a domestic, and also she was a cook. Ultimately, that's what she became, the primary job. But she worked for Black professionals. So I got to see and be around Black professionals, educators and doctors. Who basically took, in many cases, I became like, okay, this is Uncle so-and-so, even though I felt, I used to feel my mother's the maid. So, you're just being nice.
Right. But you got to see it.
I got to see somebody that looked like me.
Yes.
And I'm going to put it in terms from a kid from the east side of Detroit where people were working class. Somebody that looked like me that wore a suit and tie to work every day.
Yes. Right.
And understood, and so I was around those people and talked to them. And I remember one of the educators, one of the persons my mother worked for, I think it was about my 12th or 13th birthday. She gave me my birthday gift, and I thought, oh, it's going to be really nice. She got something good. It was a dictionary. I was so disappointed because, I'm expecting something else,
Right.
But I have that dictionary up on my bookshelf today.
Yes, because it gave you the power of words.
Because she said, learn some words. And at one time I sat down and I said, I'm going to try to learn every word in the dictionary. I started in the A's. You say you start, you get a word, then you try to use it, in sentences, during the week to see if you can incorporate it into your vocabulary. Right. But also I had another advantage. I delivered newspapers I started reading the newspaper from cover to cover from when I was 11 years old, and I got my
Okay.
paper out.
Yeah.
So therefore, I was reading stuff, and I
Mhm.
tell people I started reading the newspaper, and I used to start in the comic section when I was young, and then I moved on to the sports section, and then maybe to
Business.
and then I get to I hit the front page and some of the business, you know. See, now I go to the front page, the business section. You know, I flipped. I don't look
Right.
at the comic
Right.
section. It's just the
Right.
migration, and that just made me have a love for reading. See, I had a love for reading. Understand
Yeah.
that. So if a person, I conclude, if a person can read, you can
Mhm.
educate themselves. Look at the many
Absolutely.
people who've been in prison and stuff. You know, it turned out, man,
Mhm.
got many degrees, become written books, and some, you know,
Yeah.
become because they had time to sit there and
To
they
use it.
and
Right.
maybe could have
Absolutely.
went in there illiterate, but developed the art of reading. I
Right.
found that most people, I was exception in reading.
Yeah.
I used to sit in class, I talk about history. I used to look at history as like a story. So, you know, the teacher said, okay, we're going to read chapter 2 and then come back. Well, I'm on chapter 10.
Right.
I
But,
read, you
but
know,
even on top of that, it's really about like for each person to find where that their level
right,
of aptitude
right.
is, right? So if whether it's numbers or whether it's reading or whether it's interpersonal, like all of these things, there's not just one way,
Right,
to,
right.
but it's all very important. And what the difference is that you have to be able to have somebody who's going to say you can do it, to be able to be encouraging for each of us. Those are a lot of times the difference makers.
That is a big difference. I look at my
Mhm.
mother, even though I mentioned her, she had a grade school education, but
Mhm.
Mildred Clay didn't play. You know, number one, we have responsibilities
Yes.
around the house. You know, I remember, and they rotated between sometime my brother and sister. You know, whether it was
Mhm.
washing the dishes, taking the garbage out. And I remember one time I didn't take the garbage out,
Mhm.
and I went to bed. My mother came home, and it was snow about 4 feet deep. She woke me up and said, "You're gonna take that garbage out now."
Right. It taught you
I
a
did. I didn't
responsibility,
forget the
huh?
next time my turn came up, you know, because I
Yes.
had to crawl out of my warm bed to go down
Yes.
in the snow to put this in the garbage can. Give you a second incident to talk about my mother. My mother, even though she worked, she found time or
Mhm.
would ask her employers to get off whenever there was parent-teachers meetings.
Right.
She came to the school.
Mhm.
She was at everything. My sister, her brother, I was at, you know.
Right.
Unfortunately, she lived long enough to see all her grandkids graduate from college,
Right. That's a
you know,
blessing.
which was, you know, but my point is, I had that rock. Many people didn't have that.
Right.
I had a mother who had restrictions, and she used to say, even when we got up to the, you know, my brother and sister and I, all of us went in the military.
Mhm.
I was the last. And mom used to say, you can't stay around this house unless you going to school or working. And if you're working, you need to have your own place
Right.
because this is my house.
Set the expectation.
Right. So,
Yes.
but if you, I see, unfortunately, I see some parents, I know they want to do good and they're coddling their kid, but they're not preparing them for the world. We were prepared for the world because mama made us get up and get up. And she showed it
Yeah.
by example.
Right.
One last point.
Okay.
I think this is important.
Yes.
There was a blizzard, I remember, and nobody was going anywhere. And my mother got up to go to work, and we said, "Mom, where you going?" She said, "Well, I'm going to work." We said, "Ain't nobody going to work now. You know, it's a blizzard. Didn't you see the news?" She got up anyway and went on out there, got in the ruts, and got on the bus.
Mm.
And about an hour, 2 hours later, here come mom walking in. "Hey, mom, what you doing?" Well, wasn't nobody there. And I said, "Mom, I told you." You know, but
But she was
but
going to do what she was supposed to do.
but she was committed. So that's what
Yes.
I saw. You understand what I'm
Yes.
saying? That's what I
Yes.
saw. That was the thing that I saw. So
Yes.
everybody didn't have that. And
That
because they
example.
didn't have that, I've made it a mission. I know everybody don't.
Sure.
That's the reason I like to work with young kids because you got to
Mhm.
start there.
Yes. Well, listen, we're going to need
I'm
to wrap
sorry.
up. No, you're great. You're doing great. Columbus, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts before we close out.
No, I think the one key thing is I think just like what Bill was mentioning about being involved and mentoring and getting involved, I think we all have to
Mhm.
find our way and avenue to get involved, irrespective of what decisions are passed down from Supreme Court. And I think it really
Yes.
hones into the pillars of Healthy Heart Nation, from an aspect of political or justice is we have to vote, right? I mean, our
Yes.
vote counts. It
Right.
counts, and it lends itself, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but maybe it's going to be in 5 years or 10 years, and then will affect our kids. I think from a standpoint of education, we have to give back. We have to take time to either mentor and or help give someone a little nudge, a push,
Absolutely.
an encouragement
Yes.
that's there towards that goal that's there. I think from a standpoint of business, we have to be willing and open to providing people opportunities who maybe
Yes.
don't look exactly like us, to provide more of a diverse landscape that really enriches and provides support that can uplift any organization. And then obviously from a standpoint of health, the health that comes along, we understand the connectivity as it relates to what the impact of disparities has on education and business, and that lends itself directly into health outcomes, right, and cardiovascular events.
Right.
And so all these things, I think, really it ties together. People may say, well, what is a cardiologist have to do with the discussion on disparities or on this? Because it impacts the medical community as well.
Right.
Bias seeps its ugly head into the way in which we treat patients. It treats its ugly head into health outcomes. And so it's something that we all face and we all recognize. And so I'm more committed after this decision than I would ever have been to doing the work at hand that we need to for the next generation. And so that's what I'd encourage everyone is to get on board, and let's move this dial.
Well, thank you so much to Columbus and Bill for joining this discussion right now. We really just, we wanted to just discuss how this touched different landscapes. But I think if one thing I would say in closing is that we can't do it alone. We have to do it together, and we have to fight for this together. And it is going to take all people to move this needle forward for the sake of being, for justice for everyone. And that's what we really want to focus on today. So thanks again for joining us. If you enjoyed this program, please like and share, subscribe to Healthy Heart Nation. We will be back on the third Friday of each month. And, so look for us again, August 18th for our next session. Thank you and have a good night.
All right.
Good night.